Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. Tonight, I will take you to Japan with an introduction to Japanese mythology. I'll tell you stories and tales from Japanese folklore. We will explore some aspects of Japanese history and culture, especially Shinto, the religion that originated in Japan and to which many myths and folktales are associated. But let's start immediately with the first story, one about the creation of the world and its aftermath. At the beginning of time, the world was nothing like we know it now. There was only a chaotic mass full of seeds floating in the void. No one knows how long it lasted, as no being, God, spirit, or human, was there to see it. Gradually, the finer and lighter parts of the mass drifted upward as the heavier elements sank below. The lighter seeds formed heaven, light, translucent, and full of yin energy. The heavier seeds became earth, heavy, opaque, and full of yang energy. The world had appeared, and between these two dimensions of earth and heaven, the tension gave birth to deities. Three ancestral gods appeared, followed by others. These were in equal parts the products of earth and heaven, and so they were not male nor female. But after several more generations of gods, they began to dissociate between males and females, and they formed couples. At the time, gods went into hiding after their creation, and they didn't try to alter this world from which they were born. To this day, these first generations of gods have never reappeared, and no one knows whether they keep watching the world or have fallen into an eternal sleep. After 3 generations of ancestral gods and 4 generations of male and female divine pairs arrived, the fifth couple, the god Izanagi, he who invites, and the goddess Izanami, she who invites. They stood on a floating bridge between earth and heaven, and they received the divine spear, superbly ornamented with jewels that they used to stir the ocean under their feet. It happened that when the spear was pulled up, the brine, dripping from the tip, became solid and formed an island, the island of Onogoro. Izanagi and Izanami descended to the island and discovered what their predecessors had ignored. They could create, they could shape the world, and they could bring forth life. Together they produced 8 new islands, the islands that would become Japan, and they procreated. Soon, Izanami's belly became round, and they expected their first being in the world, created by sexuality rather than born from the forces of the world. But Izanami was pregnant with a dangerous entity, the god of fire. When she gave birth, her son burned her, and she died in the arms of Izanagi. raging with pain and anger. Izanagi attacked the newborn, and from the blood of the baby god of fire, more gods were born, such as the god of thunder. Meanwhile, Izanami, on her deathbed, also gave birth to more gods, each of them associated with a principle or a natural phenomenon like agriculture, earth, and metal. In this terrible moment of death, pain, and loss, new divine life multiplied, and the world kept evolving, becoming even more diverse and populated. The new gods scattered around this world that they were discovering, and Izanagi was left alone to his grief. But all hope had not been entirely lost. Death was only a passage, and Izanami had not disappeared. She had only descended to Yomi, the underworld where the dead resided. Izanagi resolved to search for her and bring her back to the world of the living. He found an entrance to the underworld and descended into Yomi, a dark and cold realm untouched by light of heaven. After a lengthy search, he found Izanami, weak, lying on the ground. He tried to take her in his arms and ask her to come back with him to the land of the living. But the goddess did not let him come close, and she replied that it was now too late. She belonged to Yomi, to the land of the dead, and there was no coming back, because she had already eaten food cooked in the underworld. Izanagi drew near and near, and even in the darkness perceived that her once lovely face had turned into a grim mask of death, and that her body had begun to decay. There was no return from the decay of death, and even the love they once shared could not defeat it. With sadness and anger, she chased him from the underworld. All feelings of care and love between them had vanished. Izanami was now consumed by humiliation and anger, while Izanagi was filled with fear and repulsion. When he reached the upper world of earth, he moved an enormous stone to block the entrance so that the horrifying creatures from Yomi would not be able to cross between worlds. From the other side of the rock, trapped in the ground and angrier than ever, Izanami threatened him and declared that she would now kill 1,000 people every day. Izanagi replied that if this had to be, that he would father 1,500 children every day, so that the living could still be able to grow and multiply despite her curse. This is not the end of Izanagi, and more gods are about to be created. We will resume the story in a minute, but first I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3.50 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. We let people contribute what they wish or can, and everyone gets everything that is on our page, because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. You will gain access to several bonus episodes. There are 21 right now, and we add a new one every month. And also, all our episodes can be downloaded with and without background sounds. We offer advance releases to our patrons as well. You will find a link in the description of the episode. And now, before we continue our story, let's take a moment together to prepare for our journey ahead. If you'd like, gently close your eyes and let your daily concerns drift away. Find a position that feels natural and cozy. Perhaps make small adjustments until you're perfectly comfortable. Now, draw in a deep, nourishing breath, and as you release it softly, notice how your body responds. Feel the warmth flowing from your neck down through your shoulders, melting away any tension. Let your facial muscles become soft, your jaw loose, your fingers naturally open, and your legs completely at ease. And as you settle into this peaceful state, my voice will be your gentle companion as we begin our exploration together. Let's go back to our story, shall we? Izanagi had returned to this world and now felt the need to purify himself from the miasma of the underworld. So he went to a lake and began to bathe. Water dripped from his face, and from this water, 3 new gods appeared. From the water that dripped from his left eye, the sun goddess, Amaterasu, was born. From his right eye appeared the moon god, Tsukuyomi, and from his nose, the third god, Susanoo, who was told to govern the sea. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, was attributed heaven to rule over. For some time, peace had returned to the world, which had become more orderly with the new gods born from Izanami and Izanagi. Primal elements, places, and forces, like the day and the night, were now in the hands of their respective gods. But the world was still very different from the world we know nowadays. And all these young gods were no models of wisdom. They were sometimes envious of each other. They had desires, and they could fight. At the time, day and night existed at the same time. The sun and the moon were visible in the sky together. But Tsukuyomi, the moon, was jealous of Amaterasu. Their mutual distaste grew so much that they resolved to never see each other again, and each went to a different corner of heaven. The alternates of day and night appeared from this conflict. From this moment on, they were never seen again together, and an endless cycle of day and night began, each one chasing the other. Amaterasu was also in conflict with her other brother, Susanoo, born from the nose of Izanagi, and who had been granted the seas. Susanoo resented his siblings, who could live in heaven, and was dissatisfied with his dominion of the sea. So one day he ascended to heaven to visit his sister, and could convince her to stay. But he soon became emboldened with his success and started to spend time tricking her and offending her with distasteful pranks. Amaterasu became enraged with her brother's behavior, and she decided to punish everyone for it. She hid herself in a cave. Immediately darkness filled the heavens and the earth. The sun was gone, and it seemed that an eternal night would fall onto the world. The other gods had lost the sunlight and were saddened by it. So they gathered in front of the cave and tried to attract her outside by making the roosters crow. The goddess did not appear, so they built a sacred tree in front of the cave and hung all sorts of offerings to its branches: mirrors, beads, pieces of cloth. They started clapping their hands and laughing around the tree as the goddess danced to entertain them. Drawn by the noise, Amaterasu grew curious and opened the cave's door to see what was happening outside. She was immediately dragged out of her refuge by a strong-armed god, and suddenly the light of day returned to illuminate the world. Susanoo had angered the heavenly gods with her pranks and how he had offended their queen, so he was banished and sent back to earth. Susanoo and Amaterasu would never reconcile, and because of their feud, two clans of gods formed on earth. Susanoo married a princess and started a family. He fathered multiple earthly gods, and Susanoo and his descendants reigned over this half of the world. But in heaven, Amaterasu and her own clan of heavenly gods did not intend to share the world with earthly gods. One day, Amaterasu descended to earth and demanded the submission of earth. This world teemed with life. It had majestic mountains, peaceful and beautiful forests, enchanting rivers, and deep blue seas. This part of the world was desirable. Amaterasu obtained the submission of earthly gods and sent her grandson, Ninigi, to leave and raise her eyes on earth and worship heavenly gods. Ninigi married a princess, the daughter of a mountain god, and had 3 sons with her. One of them, when he grew up, became the father of Jimmu, and Jimmu was destined to conquer the earth to become the first emperor. As Jimmu began to rule over Japan, the age of gods ended and the age of history, the age of humans, began. For centuries that would turn into millennia, Earth would now be governed by emperors descending from Amaterasu and heavenly gods. The history of Japan could now begin. We will talk about Emperor Jimmu, the Japanese pantheon, and popular heroes like the 47 Ronin. But before, let's make a stop and look at where this mythological tradition comes from, and also what Shinto is. In terms of quantity of stories and variety of versions of these stories, Japanese mythology is very, very abundant, at least as much as Greek mythology. And even though the vast majority of Japanese people consider these tales to be legends rather than historical, they are still very well known and reappear constantly in popular culture. And because Japan exports its pop culture via anime, manga, and film, these archetypes and some anecdotes may seem familiar to a lot of non Japanese. Another thing is that to foreigners, Japanese traditions may seem pretty serious. There is a sense of reverence, of wisdom, of respect for cultural traditions that for some of them appeared many centuries ago. But mythological tales are far from being dead serious. Some of them are, but others are silly. The characters react in a strange way. They can even be scatological. I removed this from the story of the rivalry between Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and her brother, Susanoo. But the pranks he plays on her include throwing feces around. That's the kind of pranks we are dealing with. And there is another episode in which a goddess of agriculture creates delicious foods, but she hides to produce them from bringing them to the table because they come out of her nose, her ears, her mouth, and other orifices. This myth mixes elements that are poetic and cosmic with others that are trivial and sometimes truly bizarre. It is not all about wisdom and recollection, really. Gods are also very human in their personalities and behaviors. They can be petty, they can be jealous, they can make mistakes. They are not role models that believers would be invited to take inspiration from, like in some other traditions. There is a general term for Japanese gods and many other beings that you may have heard of: kami. Kami is often translated as gods in the West, and this is a dimension of it. But kami are also the spirits, the entities, the phenomena, or the holy powers that are venerated in the religion of Shinto. The concept is not very obvious to grasp. In Western tradition, we have no problem associating a place, a phenomenon, a force of nature, a principle, with a deity. This was the case in all other stories about mythological traditions that I have told you about. But the concept of kami is even wider than that. Kami are not necessarily beings that personify something or rule over something. They can also be ancestors or ancient emperors that became kami after death. In that case, the associated concept in the West would be spirit. They can be just a force of nature or even just a concept. And they are not separated from nature. They are of nature, manifestations of the energy of the universe. If there is a concept, an idea, a process, kami exists that embodies and performs the specific functions of it. There is a kami of wind, or the kami of rivers as a concept, and also a kami of every particular river, and a kami of roads, the kami of entryways, the kami of infectious disease, the kami of good health. The list is almost endless, and there is a shrine in Japan when more than 2 million kami are registered. Sometimes it is said that there would be more than 8 million different kami. It is not exactly that. There is a general name given to these countless kami. Yaoyoruzu no kami, which literally means 8 million. But what it expresses is countless, extremely numerous. People don't actually believe that there are precisely 8 million, but that there are many, many of them. Generally, there are considered to be 3 main variations of kami. There are the heavenly gods and goddesses called Amaterasu kami, the goddess and goddesses of the earthly realm, Kunitsu kami, and the rest, the countless kami. These definitions are broad categories, sorts of guidelines for grouping them. The worship of kami through rituals and offerings is at the core of Shinto practice. The kami are worshipped at household or family shrines and at public shrines dedicated to specific kami. The worshipping, the rituals, are done to cultivate harmony between kami and humans and to ask for kami's blessing. Kami are not particularly good or bad, malevolent or benevolent. They may have both dimensions, and they are never fully reliable. So securing their support is believed to be important for luck and success in all sorts of endeavors. Shinto comes with principles such as the need to respect traditions and regularly perform rituals of purification, but it does not emphasize specific moral codes. There is no equivalent to the commandments of Christianity, and Shinto doesn't have a centralized organization like the Catholic Church or some Protestant denominations. It is historically the most widespread religious practice in Japan, but not the only one. Buddhism also was and still is important. So, how did religions spread in Japan? The basis of Shinto, kami veneration, existed in Japan more than 2,000 years ago. Shinto is native to Japan, but in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, so that is 1,500 years ago, Buddhism arrived in the country, especially brought by Korean immigrants. It had traveled across Asia from its birthplace in India over several centuries, but it became widespread in Japan, and it has been around for so long that it has become another national religion or philosophy. Buddhism didn't replace Shinto. Instead, the two influenced each other and were not mutually exclusive. One influence of Buddhism that has been observed, for example, is that the decades following its arrival, the kami became more and more depicted with the appearance of human beings, as opposed to shapeless forces or fantasy animals, and kami were integrated into Buddhist cosmology as a part of the universe. From the 8th century, emperors of Japan had converted to Buddhism, and they performed Buddhist rites and also other rites to honor the kami. Along the centuries, many different schools of Buddhism have appeared in Japan, with cultural specificities. For example, we could talk about Japanese Zen. Zen is a school of Buddhism that emphasizes self restraint, the attempt to discover the nature of the mind and the nature of things, and the practice of meditation, rather than the knowledge of doctrines that would have to be learned and assimilated. It is a form of Buddhist practice that has spread to the West for a large part from Japan, which is why we know it as Zen. But Zen is a Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word Chan, and Zen Buddhism actually appeared in China. But along with other schools or traditions of Buddhism, it spread to Japan and took deep roots in this country. So Shinto and Buddhism coexisted, and both were practiced by a large part of the Japanese population, from emperors to common man. But when it comes to myth and folk tales, Shinto had a lot more influence because we know most ancient stories from chronicles that were written in the 8th century AD, and at the time, the focus of these chronicles was to emphasize native cultural elements and defend the divine lineage of emperors supposed to descend from the sun goddess and the sun kami, Amaterasu. So in these chronicles, elements like tales and legends that could not be considered as genuinely Japanese, that is to say, linked to the kami and the narratives that existed in Japan before Buddhism, these were for a part left aside or minimized. But the construction of Japanese culture and its native mythology started long before that and received various influences anyway, from peoples in the north and the south, as south as Okinawa, and influences from China and Korea. So, what was considered genuinely Japanese in the 8th century were elements and aspects of the culture that had been around for a long time and had gone through their own evolution in Japan. But some of them had been heavily inspired by other cultures starting thousands of years prior, especially by China. As you know, prior to its opening to modern Western techniques and a major reform of its society in the 19th century, Japan went through a long period of isolation. For centuries, the country was almost entirely forbidden to foreigners. Other foreign religions were banned too. They became legal only when Japan began this fast modernization. But at the same time, the government had a nationalistic agenda. They were trying to reinforce national unity, to keep tight control of public opinion and galvanize it in favor of economic development and expansion overseas. And this had repercussions on the religion. Shinto had long been completely integrated into Japanese society, but it was a decentralized practice. For the first time, the state tried to take control of it. It selected and approved priests. It took control of the shrines. And this period is called by historians State Shinto. The goal of governments until the end of the Second World War was to make the national religion a tool for unity, for social control, and a justification for the emperor's divine power. Over the past 70 years, Since the end of Second World War, religious practice in Japan has decreased markedly, but still, for the majority of Japanese, Shinto and Kami, along with Buddhism, are still very much part of the culture they experience every day, and the majority of Japanese participate in rituals now and then and festivals. But let's return to mythology. I mentioned earlier that the accession of legendary Emperor Jimmu was the end of the age of gods and the beginning of the age of humans, but not the end of mythology. So let's explore the mythical story of the first emperor. You remember the heavenly gods, led by the sun goddess Amaterasu, had established their domination on earth. Amaterasu had a grandson called Ninigi, who resided and married on earth. Ninigi had a grandson who became Emperor Jimmu. At the time when the future emperor was born, his clan fought for control over Japan. The land was fractioned into multiple clans, and his was located in the south of Japan, on the island of Kyushu. Jimmu was the youngest of four brothers, and his older brothers led the family, especially Itsuse, the older brother. It was decided that a migration to the east and the north should happen because it was their destiny to establish their dominance upon the entire country, and they should administer it from a more central location. Back then, like now, an inland sea separated the islands of Kyushu, Shikoku, and Honshu. Led by Itsuse, the clan crossed the inland sea and landed near the city now known as Osaka. But all of Japan had not accepted their authority, and there was a local chieftain known for his ferocity that occupied the area with his men. He was unusually tall, and his name was the long-legged man, Nagazune-hiku. Itsuse wanted to take control of this place, and Nagazune-hiku refused to surrender, so battle ensued. Jimmu participated in the battle as the second in command, and soon the two armies faced each other. Itsuse's troops facing eastward, and Nagazune-hiku's westward. As soon as the battle started, the migrants suffered heavy losses. They were facing the sun and could not see their opponents well. Ironically, the sun itself, which was the manifestation of their ancestor Amaterasu, was against them because of their unfortunate positioning on the battlefield. The battle was lost, and even worse, Itsuse was killed. The survivors, now led by Jimmu, could do nothing but flee. That night, when they finally made camp, shame and sorrow weighed heavily on every man. But Jimmu was not one to give up, and he understood that their defeat had come from fighting while facing east. As he was praying to Amaterasu, she sent him an envoy that would guide his troops to victory. A giant three-legged crow appeared in the sky. Jimmu recognized it for the gift of Amaterasu that it was. The crow would guide them to victory, and was proof that heavenly gods had not abandoned their children. Jimmu elaborated a plan. They would re-embark, sail east, and land again east of the territory of Nagasunehiko, so that they would be able to fight again, but this time facing westward, and so it was done. The army landed to the east of Honshu and walked towards the west until reaching the land of their enemies, led by the three-legged crow. A new battle happened, and this time the light of Amaterasu blinded the other side. Jimmu was victorious. The fight had taken place in the province of Yamato, near the ancient city of Nara. And with that victory, Jimmu was recognized as a legitimate ruler of Japan and ascended to the imperial throne. His reign was blessed by the gods and was extraordinarily long, as he died at the age of 126. It is said that once he climbed a mountain near the Nara to survey the inland sea between three big islands that he now controlled, and he observed that the sea was shaped like a heart, like the ring two dragonflies make when they mate. As he was making this observation, a mosquito tried to sting him and steal some of his royal blood. Immediately, a dragonfly appeared and killed the mosquito. Dragonflies were sacred animals that served the gods, and this was why one had intervened to protect the emperor. Because of the shape of the inland sea, and because it was protected by the gods, Japan thus received its classical name, Akitsushima, the Dragonfly Island. And since then, the Yamato dynasty, the imperial house of Japan, rules over the land. But mythology is not just about gods and emperors. Along many centuries, mythical heroes have appeared or evolved in Japanese folktales, and even though their stories are sometimes not specifically mythological, like the tale of the 47 Ronin, these are good stories. I selected three of them: the story of Momotaro, Shita Kiri Susume, and the 47 Ronin. So here are more stories. Let's get started with Momotaro. Once upon a time, there was an old couple who lived in the countryside near a river. They had had a long life of work, and they were poor, but they were happy and grateful to be together. Their days passed peacefully, and even though they only had a small house and just enough food, this was enough for them. Their only regret was that they would have liked to have children, to expand their family and have company in their old days, but no children were born. Until one day, the woman went to the river to wash clothes, as she often did, and she saw something round floating in the waters. She caught it and realized it was the biggest peach she had ever seen. It was smooth, colorful, and its delicious smell indicated that it would taste perfectly sweet. With difficulty, because the peach was heavy, she brought it back home to show it to her husband. They rejoiced over this gift from the river, and the husband went ahead for a knife to open and share the peach. But when he cut it open, instead of a seed, it contained a young child, not older than 1 or 2, but already formed and healthy. The child could speak, and told them that he had been bestowed by the gods to be their son. They would take care of him, and he would brighten their old days and love them as much as they would love him. The couple could not believe their luck, and they adopted the child that they named Momotaro. Momo, meaning peach, and Taro, eldest son in the family. And life went on in the house. They were still poor, but nature was generous, and the three of them had just what they needed. Their hearts were content, and days, weeks, years passed in this simple everyday joy. More than 10 years, Momotaro had grown up and was now an adolescent. He loved his parents, but he had grown curious for the rest of the world. He dreamt of adventure and thought that maybe the gods had bigger plans for him. Even though their life was peaceful, the limits of their land was sometimes explored by a band of demons who marauded to steal from farmers. These demons, called Oni, were more and more threatening, and Momotaro decided to do something about it. Nobody exactly knew what the Oni looked like. They were always seen from afar. But the few people who had crossed them and managed to escape had said that they were hideous, gigantic creatures, looking like ogres, with one or several horns emerging from their heads. They had sharp claws and wild hair, and their skin was either blue or red or green, so that they had nothing in common with humans. The Oni didn't live nearby. They dwelled in a distant island, a place called Onigashima, Demon Island, and from their base they launched expeditions to ransom and loot. Momotaro wanted to end their reign of terror, and he resolved to travel to the island and attack them. His parents were worried, and they tried to dissuade him. Who would take care of them if he never returned? And how could a single young man defeat an entire band of demons? But Momotaro had made his decision, and they had to let him go. For his long journey, his mother gave him delicious dumplings, and the journey began. At first, Momotaro was alone, but on the way he made friends: a dog, a monkey, and a pheasant. The three could talk, and against a portion of his dumplings, they agreed to accompany and help him. The four of them became best friends, and they learned to trust each other. When they finally reached Onigashima, the demon island, they devised a plan to penetrate discreetly the demon's fort and attack the demons one by one. Helped by his three animal friends, Momotaro defeated each one, and their chief was captured. In the fort, they found the treasure that the demons had accumulated, and with their captive, they traveled back to Momotaro's homeland. He had not only eliminated the threat, he had brought back enough for his parents to finish their days in abundance. The tale of Momotaro was put in writing during medieval Japan, but it probably comes from older oral traditions. There are variants. In older versions, he was not found inside the peach, but his mother became pregnant after eating the fruit. But it is a form of tale that has been around for a long time. A young boy or girl with a mysterious origin who accomplishes great exploits, makes friends, discovers himself along the way. It is the initial theme of Dragon Ball, for example, the manga. There is something inherently appealing to this story. Another Japanese folktale that has a form that can be found throughout the world is Shitakiri Suzume, the sparrow with the slit tongue, and it goes like this. Once upon a time, a poor old couple lived near the foot of a mountain, covered in trees and near a river. The man cut wood for a living, and his wife fished in the river. But the two could not be more different in character. The old man was honest and kind, whereas his wife was very greedy and would not help anyone if it didn't serve her interests. One day, the man went into the mountain to cut wood as he used to. But on his way, he found an injured little sparrow crying out for help. The weakness and desperation of the poor bird moved him, so he took it back home and fed it rice to help it recover. When his wife returned, she was annoyed that he would waste food on such a small creature. Who cared about a sparrow when they were poor and food was precious? But the old man didn't listen to her and continued caring for the little bird. As days passed, the two became friends, and the sparrow would stay on his shoulder eating rice from him, and the recovery and friendship of the bird made the old woodcutter happy. But one day he had to return to the mountain, and the sparrow was still too weak to leave the house, so he left it in care of the woman. She had no intention of feeding it, so instead of staying home to look after the bird, she went out fishing. And while she was gone, the hungry sparrow looked for food inside the house and found some starch that was left out. The bird ate it all. When the woman came back and saw this, she was so angry that she punished the sparrow by cutting out his tongue, and then she sent it flying back to the mountain. The poor little bird, full of pain and fear, escaped and disappeared. When the old man returned, he was so sad and shocked at what his wife had done that he immediately went searching for the bird. Other sparrows knew him and what he had done for one of their own, so they helped him find his way into a bamboo grove where they lived. He was reunited with his friend, the little sparrow he had saved, and the other birds brought him food and sang for him. As he was reassured that his little friend was alive and well, he told the birds that it was time for him to go back home. They presented him with a choice of presents. There was a large basket and a small basket, and he was told that he could choose one as a present and take it back home. The old man knew that his forces were no longer what they once were, and there was a long way home, so he chose a small basket. When he arrived home, he opened it, and to his surprise, discovered a treasure of gold and silver inside. The wife pressured him to tell her how he got this, and he told her everything about the sparrows and the two baskets. She couldn't help but think he was an idiot for choosing the small one, so she ran to the sparrow's grove in hope of getting more treasure for herself. The sparrows presented her with a small and large basket, and warned her to not open any basket before getting home. Of course, she chose the large one, but on the way home, as she was still in the mountain, she was so impatient to discover the content that she opened it. To her surprise, the box was full of deadly snakes. They startled her so much that she trembled all the way down the mountain and broke her neck. Her greed had only led to her demise. Our last story for tonight is not technically mythological. It is a legendary tale that derives from a real historical incident, the revenge of the 47 Ronin. The real incident is from the early 18th century. It is not that ancient, but I chose to include it because it is a good story and it can be considered mythology in the making. Many myths around the world probably have origins in natural disasters or real events that were modified and embellished. The version of the story we know of the 47 Ronin was written decades after the fact, and it mixes reality with fiction. Even though there is no doubt that the incident really happened, so maybe in 1,000 years, 47 Ronin will have kept evolving and it will be considered a piece of mythology. Now let's discover the story. It all began in 1701, when Japan was a feudal country ruled by shoguns. Emperors were still nominally at the head of the country, but it was governed by military dictators appointed by them. Japan was also governed locally by feudal lords called daimyos, who pledged allegiance to the emperor and served the central power in the capital, Edo, that we know as Tokyo today. To better control the daimyos, they were requested to alternate periods of living in their domain and periods of living in Edo, where they served the shogunate. Each daimyo had a following, a house, composed of the people serving him, including samurai warriors. It happened one day that one of the daimyos, Asano, who had a small fiefdom in the west of Honshu, was tasked to arrange a reception in Edo as part of his service in the capital. He was to be given instructions by a high-ranking official named Kira and execute them following the elaborate etiquette of the shogunate. But Kira was a rude and arrogant man who had no respect for small lords. He was also corrupt and accepted bribes, and early on the cooperation with Asano went very poorly. He would insult the lord, treat him badly, whereas other lords that had bribed him for his cooperation were treated nicely. Asano and his small following never paid Kira anything, and so the official kept treating the lord very harshly. This escalated until one day Kira openly insulted Asano, calling him a country boy with no manners. In Edo Castle, any kind of violence was completely forbidden. Even drawing a sword, a katana, was a grave offense. But after weeks of harassment from Kira, Asano lost his temper. He attacked the official with a dagger, wounding him in his face. They were immediately separated by guards, and the wound was just superficial. But Asano had committed an unforgivable offense, and the only fitting sentence for this was death. His goods and lands were to be confiscated after his death. His family was to be ruined, and his retainers were to be made leaderless. Ronin. As a daimyo, Asano was spared the shame of execution. Instead, he was ordered to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide that allowed lords and samurai to die with honor rather than suffer a disgraceful death. And so it was done. Asano took his own life, his family was stripped of everything, and his followers were left without a master. All of this stemmed from a brief moment of uncontrolled anger provoked by Kira's appalling behavior. Asano's troops comprised over 300 men. The majority of them accepted their faith and scattered in search of a new master, or they abandoned their military life. These men had such a bond with their lord that honor commanded his death be avenged. Otherwise, they would have acted cowardly and dishonorably. But the shogunate explicitly prohibited revenge in this case, and so they were conflicted. The rules of the shogunate and the rules of honor gave them conflicting paths to follow. Of all these men, 47 warriors, 47 Ronin, because they had lost their master, refused to allow their lord to go unavenged. They banded together, swearing a secret oath to avenge their master by killing Kira. Even though they knew they would be punished harshly for doing so, death would be their sentence, and they accepted it. Worried that the Ronin would attempt to avenge their fallen lord, Kira took careful precautions. He retired from public life and kept the leader of Asano's guard under constant watch. As Kira was unreachable, the 47 Ronin had to wait for him to lower his guard. They behaved as if they had no intention to avenge their master. It took a year and a half for it to happen, and in the meantime, some of them infiltrated his house as workmen or merchants to become familiar with the layout of the house and the character of all within. Finally, after 2 full years, the 47 Ronin, who secretly stayed coordinated, knew the house, the way people behaved inside, and how they could suddenly overwhelm it and kill Kira. One night, they launched their attack in 2 groups, one by the front door, one by the back door. They found Kira, who was hiding and trying to hide his identity as their sentence was executed. Asano had been avenged. The Ronin did not try to hide. They surrendered as they had planned to do. The shogunate in Edo was put in a difficult situation. They had bravely accepted the precepts by avenging the death of their lord, but they had also defied the shogunate's authority. The populace admired them for their courage and their loyalty, so petitions were made in their favor. The shogunate agreed to make a concession. They had to die, but they would be allowed to die honorably by committing seppuku, like their lord had done 2 years earlier, and so it was done. Each of them ended their life. The youngest was only 16. They were buried in front of the tomb of their master, and the tombs became a place of great veneration. The sacrifice of the 47 Ronin had not been totally in vain, for the survivors of Asano's house, with the name of Asano, being claimed by his revenge. The other Ronin that had remained unemployed because of the disgrace of their former house could find new positions, and the family was given back its lordship. This is the end of tonight's story. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep, or if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.